Hello and welcome to this Bournemouth podcast. I'm with Frederick Edward today. We're standing outside actually in the rain to deliver this quick discussion. Um, I saw
Sans umbrella.
yeah, minus the umbrella. I saw James Cleverley actually. I just remembered this. He was being grilled by Peston, I think, on how disastrous the election launch was, and he says, "Well, it shows that Sunak is a better man than Starmer because Starmer hurried inside for his, election speech, and he didn't brave the rain outside, as if this is the mark of what Britain need. We need our leaders to stand in the rain." With music blaring nearby when they make an announcement. That's what we
Yeah,
really.
yeah. Churchill never stood in the rain, so Sunak's already miles ahead of him.
Exactly, exactly. Just quickly on this, don't you think, I'm not the only person to have thought this, but don't you think he could have made some kind of joke about the fact it was raining or about the music? I mean, he even did a quick Twitter video when he came inside, although it's probably recorded off.
Oh, that was particularly cringeworthy, where he just sort of jumped down in kind of ad lib fashion. No,
Yeah,
it was dreadful. Yeah, it was the whole imagery of it was totally bizarre. I mean, a man who's got the world at his fingertips. He's conquered the heights of business, all these kind of jobs he's had, very fancy, but he can't get an umbrella, doesn't have a Macintosh, won't go inside. We think these are the big brains who are supposedly leading the country out of crisis. I mean, that's the narrative they're going to be pushing for the next awful few weeks that we face. And yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. It was all very awkward. It's like maybe he thought that nobody else would notice it was raining.
yeah, possibly, but unfortunately for him, we
It
did.
was so.
I wrote a piece earlier for the European Conservative where I said that as if it wasn't bad enough when he was outside, when it was pissing down on him, and the music was blaring, he must have gone inside, checked his phone, his WhatsApps or his Twitter or whatever else he does, and seen an absolute deluge of criticism from Tory MPs. We were discussing just before we recorded that the Tory MPs seem frustrated about the timing of the election, not really because they think it'll make a difference about how many seats they'll win, because I think we all know and they all know they're buggered either way. But they're frustrated because it's only 6 weeks. They don't have time really to find themselves new jobs for when their seats are inevitably lost, and they don't have time to prepare their lives outside of Parliament. Whereas Sunak, of course, being richer than the king and having properties all over the states, is quite fine in this regard. And you made a good point. I hadn't thought about this, but it shows that they've known for a very long time that they're screwed either way. It doesn't matter when the election takes place, they've lost.
Mm.
And yet they've done nothing over 14 years to actually change this.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just one big job creation scheme, and I suppose they're all sad that they can no longer have their snouts in the trough, and their snouts are being removed sooner than they thought that would have been. Yeah, I mean, maybe there needs to be some kind of government initiative to get former Tory MPs back into the job market, because heaven knows they're not employable anywhere else.
Yeah.
But no, it does. It reeks of the kind of ideological bereftness of the whole government. They've had, as you say, 14 years to do something, anything,
Mm.
and 6 weeks. With 6 weeks left, they suddenly realise that it's all been for naught, and that the merry-go-round is coming to an end, and they all will be chucked off and remembered, for being the least effective, most well pathetic kind of government, potentially in post-war history. So yeah, what a legacy to lead.
I think so. I mean, I think one of the biggest signs of this. I mean, it's not the biggest policy. It wouldn't have made that much of a difference, but it's been very sort of iconic because of how much it's been in the headlines. Is the Rwanda plan? Sunak says
Yeah.
there won't be any flights before the election, which is code for there'll never be any flights ever because the Tories won't win the election. Labour have already pledged to get rid of the policy altogether. So two
Mm.
years down, I think it's almost 400 million we've spent on this plan, including hundreds of thousands flying James Cleverley over to Rwanda and back.
Couldn't
And
you just left him there?
well, possibly it would have been good. The whole cabinet, ideally, and the FSA.
Yes, there you
Um,
go. They can all be re-employed in camps there, acting as guards. That could be, yeah. There you go. There's the employment scheme.
absolutely.
But
But
but it was never going to happen. These are
no,
all just little chunks of red juicy meat that they throw out, but actually, it was never going to happen. None of these policies actually mean anything ever going to take place, because it doesn't matter. Like the whole Tory party is the heir to Blair. They are. It is a post Blair creation. They're fully in lockstep with the Blairite revolution. There is no conservatism in the Conservative Party. Okay, there are pockets perhaps, but they're so few in number and so ineffectual that it makes no difference. So this whole, we see this media attempt to portray the Conservatives and Sunak as a safe pair of hands, the good old boys who will stop the Reds from destroying the country. I don't know how can anybody continue to believe this pathetic line that's being trotted out? They're not conservative. They were never conservative, and they won't be conservative. The only way that we're going to get any kind of power on the right is by letting the Conservative Party wither away and die on the vine. It's very frustrating, and I understand the fear that people have in seeing David Lammy and his ilk, in cabinet, in power, actually representing the country. He thought Grant Shapps was bad. Fuck, bloody hell, we're going to have some real double-digit IQ people on, representing us in the cabinet. But that's the price we have to pay. We can't. This ridiculous merry-go-round has to end.
Well, that leads us, I think, to an interesting point, actually, which I've been following, as I think people on our side of politics often do, what Peter Hitchens has been saying in response to the election being called. And indeed, it sort of followed what he's been saying for some time as Starmer's leadership has developed and some policies have come out, and indeed, as he and others have been looking a bit into his past and his political background. Normally, Hitchens, for years and years, has told people not to bother voting. Both parties are terrible. The Tories will promise the world and deliver on nothing. And Labour, while obviously being more pro the ideas which we're against, are also often ineffective, or they're not going to, anything that they will do is something that the Tories essentially will do, even if just a few years later anyway. But he's taken quite a different line this time around Starmer, particularly because of his more radical past in politics, I think, especially around sort of environmental politics. And he has actually advised people this time. It's quite sketchy at the moment. I'm intrigued to see what he says as time goes on, but his line has been vote against Starmer is one thing that he said. Now, admittedly, when someone pressed him on this on Twitter, will you be voting then against Starmer, whether that means for the Tories or whatever? He said, I live in a safe Labour seat. So it's slightly frustrating, actually, that. And I'd be intrigued to know whether he would be saying the same thing about voting for Starmer if he didn't live in a safe Labour seat, and what his advice would be then. But it does beg the question, what do Conservatives do this time? I mean, you're quite right about what you said about the Labour figures. At worrying times are ahead. Is it as bad as people make out? Does it mean we all need to flock out and actually vote to try and block them? Or, as people like us often do, just not bother voting at all?
Yeah, no, it's a tough one to answer. I mean, my more optimistic self, which rarely makes occurrences, would tend to think that the Labour Party won't be as bad in power as one would fear. They will be limited by their public opinion. It maybe depends on how many seats they win. I don't get the impression that Starmer is, he's not a Maoist revolutionary. I'm sure he's got a red background. I'm sure he's well versed in all the kind of Marxist dialectical nonsense that they all are. But I would be surprised if it's quite as awful as we would imagine. I assume it would just be a continuation of what's already happening. And that being the case, I would rather that the Conservative Party get absolutely hammered, and as a force in British politics are reduced to rubble, basically, and can be replaced by something else, whether it be through some kind of insurgency in the Conservative Party or whether a new party emerges on the right to replace them. I'm not really too fussed about, but I would assume that the Conservative Party is now too compromised to actually be a viable long-term right-wing political party. It's never for how many decades has it failed in that duty? There are too many vested interests, and the structures are um, too compromised already for that to take place. It has to be something that's set up from the ground up as an alternative. So I would assume, I think what would be preferable is for the Conservative Party to get wiped out in the face of a Labour Party who are not popular, who are voted in purely out of apathy
Yeah.
for the Conservative Party, basically. This is going to be an election where there's no enthusiasm at any point of the political spectrum whatsoever. Uh, and we can only hope that the Labour Party are just going to continue. It's just going to be business as usual. I mean, we've said it for how many years have we said that there isn't a fag paper of difference between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party?
Yeah.
I'm not wholly convinced that they are some kind of mad revolutionary version of the Labour Party. I mean, what's your take on it?
No, I agree with that actually. I'm sort of, I suppose, quite surprisingly being slightly optimistic in this, in that I agree with that. I don't think it'll be too much worse. I mean, one thing that sort of interests me in this argument is that a lot of people, including I think Hitchens, who talks about this, he says that he's the obituarist of Britain. Britain and its political system, in that sense, is dead. So, how much worse can a Labour government, even under Starmer, be? How much damage can they do
Mm.
if we've already reached the bottom? I mean, politically, I've got absolutely no hope for where we are
Yeah.
now. All my hope lies in sort of future politics, much down the line, even if that's 100 years' time. Um, Hopefully, the sort of the seeds are being laid now for a movement which can rise up much further down the line and which can at least look back at what groups like ours have been warning about or have been highlighting, and realize that the wrong path was taken before, and to try and avoid that. So no, I won't be voting. I don't.
Ye-
I
mm.
couldn't advise anybody to, and I hope I'm right on this. I don't think that it's going to be particularly much worse. So the areas I am most concerned about actually are on the more political levels, like the possibility of Labour bringing in votes for 16-year-olds, which I think would
Yeah.
actually delay the time at which positive political change comes in.
Mm.
Perhaps even, I don't know what you think about this, but even the House of Lords, say, to democratise the House of Lords, making that an elected chamber, I think that'd be a horrendous move. Um, so I,
Yeah, I mean, I broadly agree. I think we are where we are. That's a truism and a completely hollow statement. But you know, there is what's the
what
old
people
saying?
tune into the Bournemouth podcast for.
Good. Well, I'm happy to provide that service. They say there's much ruin in a nation, and I suppose the fear is that we're already scraping the barrel of that theory, and it's the length of time which it would take for the Labour Party to run their disastrous course before some kind of revolution or some kind of return to normality would take place. But that still doesn't mean that voting the Conservatives now would result in that.
No,
We are going to have to take our medicine, and we're just talking about timeframes.
yeah,
And yeah, my concern is, what's left afterwards. I mean, what's left now, really? There's been so much degradation and damage to the country. It's not irreversible. Nothing's irreversible, really, if you have the will
no.
to actually do something. And clocks can be turned back, contrary to popular opinions. But yeah, where will we stand after 5 years of Starmer? It's just going to be, it's like we are now, but slightly worse. But that's how things have been going for the last few decades. And how long could that
No.
continue?
I mean, if we look at issues that I mean, I don't normally care about what voters are interested in, but these are important topics. I think if we talk about immigration, we are
Mm,
already having, what was the figure today? Was it 1.2 million uh, gross figure over the past year,
yeah,
something like that. We have
yeah,
we have illegal migration numbers that are higher than legal numbers were a few decades ago. So there's already too far down the road on that issue. If you look at crime, I think it's a tenth of prisons should be shut down according to regulators. We're having to release prisoners because there's no room, and police are being told not to arrest people because there's no room. So we're already too far down the line on that. I mean, we know as well that most criminals who finally end up in prison have already committed by that point, other, of course, than murderers who go in the first time. But 30
Yep.
or 40 or 50 offences, they're already hardened criminals, already too far. If we look at education, for example, sex education, it's already widespread. And in fact, it's in a lot of the Tory seats where the most extreme and most radical programmes get pushed out, like in Warwickshire a few years ago. Um, I can't see, in terms of the actual issues, how things can get worse. Like I just said, constitutionally, I think it can get worse. I think the system can be turned in a direction that it will perhaps make it more difficult for actual conservative groups to gain power in the decades to come. And that is a worry, actually. But as you say, we are where we are. Voting against Starmer isn't going to stop him getting in because the Tories have buggered themselves up so much for 14 years.
Mm.
It's an inevitability at this
I
point.
mean, I would say I think things could get a lot worse. There's always that possibility, so let's not be too optimistic. But no, I think the system is basically ossified. It is all the structures in place are dedicated towards managed decline. We have very well remunerated civil servants and academic classes who are in these sinecures, and they're happy just to let the show roll on. That there will be no significant changes. That it will just be a continual degradation of where we are. We'll be slowly exhausting the supplies of social capital and economic capital that have been built up over generations, and we'll gradually cede ground to parts of the world with more vigorous attitudes towards government and which have more vitality and which aren't intent on and content of sitting on their behinds eating a Greg's pasty and printing money and just letting it all accumulate and they spend it all on Netflix. There are parts of the world that actually do emphasize social responsibility and economic growth, and it's not a dirty word
No.
to encourage entrepreneurship and all this kind of thing. These are all just hollow phrases that get thrown around by politicians. They all say, "Oh yeah, we want Britain to be," well, pick a catchphrase.
Build
There
back
was
better
about
would be
a
one.
thousand delivered by Sunak this morning. They all mean nothing because nothing ever happens. It's all just talk. If there are the gap between rhetoric and action is the chasm so vast, and that will just continue. I just think it's going. I'm not that pessimistic about what's on the horizon because we've already seen it in action.
We're already here. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's just we're like the sort of the abused partner. We know what the partner's like. We keep coming back to them. They keep giving us a black eye and throwing crockery around the kitchen. But it's what we know, so we keep coming back because we can't imagine what life would be like without them. I think that's
Well,
the
isn't that
state
a
of the British
cheery?
election.
I thought you weren't a pessimist. Look, we are at Bournebrook Magazine, cheapskates. We have the lower version of Zoom. So time is running out. I've just been notified. So a couple more issues I think we should cover quickly.
We
One
are
of
a
them,
bit. We are a big budget production, though.
massive. You wouldn't believe
Yeah,
it. Uh,
many zeros,
yeah, but just the one.
and numbers before the zeros as well.
Oh, damn. Right. The first one, Farage. He isn't
Yes.
standing. He's going to focus his efforts on America, obviously a much more
Mm,
cushy job.
yes.
People love him over there. He's Mr. Brexit. Obviously, the campaigns have a lot more money involved. Great deal. He is still going to campaign a bit, and he says that he will stand in the future. He still has one big political action to carry out, he said in a video that I saw just before we started. So it's not a sort of be all and end all. It's not, no, I'm buggering off to
No.
America, not doing anything. But he is gone this time. What do you think about that?
I mean, I've seen people up in arms about it. He's chickened out. He's not. He's put himself before the country, all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And on a kind of reactive level, I do understand that. He is the great hope of the right in some ways, but I think that also speaks to the lack of talent that we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
We can't have the whole future of any kind of right wing resurgency in the UK dependent on one man. I mean, that is just it's not sustainable. And if that is what we have, then it's just hollow. and that shows it's just, we don't want a cult of personality. We need something far more deeper rooted. If you look at political movements that do well, they're embedded throughout different strata of society. Look at the left, the March through the Institutions. They did lots of groundwork. They spent years winning boring council seats, having these kinds of mind-numbingly dull positions that actually do, on the aggregate, lend lots of influence and control over society. And that's how they've been successful. They didn't just turn up with one figurehead and take over everything. Because even if Farage became, the great leader, we'd still have a politicized civil service, and let's say he was the head of the Conservative Party, we'd still
Yeah,
have the abundant weapons
rest of the party.
in power.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's sad but understandable, and also he's been treated. He has done a lot. We can't
yeah,
expect the man to do everything.
I do agree with that. In a sense, he owes nobody anything. I think the problem I have is the way it's been teased. I'll let you know soon. All this waiting games to disappoint.
Yeah, yeah.
But that is admittedly a little bit soap opera for me to say that. So I'll move on quickly before
No, I do understand. Yeah, it's a will he, won't he? But that's just
politics.
well, for the media, isn't it? But yeah.
Yeah. Reform obviously is left in a bad state because of this,
Mhm.
undoubtedly. I think they're probably going to do pretty badly now.
Yeah, I can't imagine them having much of an impact other than a few marginal seats where they might deprive the already hammered Tories of a couple of seats, but it's going to be marginal, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And what about other parties? I mean, we've been really friendly with the SDP for a really long time, actually, at the magazine.
Mm,
Um, is this an opportunity? I mean, as we said earlier, Labour's not going to win because there's a groundswell of enthusiasm for a Starmer government. It's because people are so sick of the Tories, they'll either
mm,
vote for Labour just as an alternative, or they won't bother voting, and Labour will still turn out and win. So does that mean
yeah.
there's a bit of scope for groups like the SDP to actually take a bit of ground, or do we think because of the electoral system, it's which I support, I have to say, because hopefully in this case it will get rid of the Tories to a large extent, at least if not this time, next.
Mm.
Um, will they be able to make any action, or maybe is 6 weeks too little time for them? I don't know how well prepared groups like.
Yeah. I would imagine that they'll have very marginal impact on anything. As you say, it's down to the electoral system, which I'm no longer in favour of.
Oh,
I did. I used to share your opinion to a certain degree, but I just think what we have now is this terrible stasis, and this ossification of the political order, and I don't see any means by which the electorate can actually affect any change.
no,
So I, you know, as a conservative, self-described, do have some attachment to the established order and the way of doing things, but we also need to recognize when they are not working in our favor. And I don't think anybody can see, you know, the elections in recent years and think it's anything other than a disaster. I mean, look at UKIP, how well they did. Was it 2015? I want to say where they
yeah,
got
right. It was before the referendum, wasn't it? Yeah,
20. They got, I don't know, it's like
2015. Well, they got millions
15%
of
of the vote. I
votes
can't. Yeah, they got millions of votes, and they
in
got
two
tons more
sixty.
than the SNP, but nothing.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, absolutely sod all.
yeah. No, you're not wrong. And actually, I suppose you could. I sort of defended an unelected upper chamber earlier within the House of Lords, but you could make quite easily the same point there. I mean, the
You
point that has
reach
to
me.
be made is if it became democratic, it doesn't mean that it solves the problem for us.
No,
Um,
no.
So it's a tricky one, especially if becoming democratic means votes to 16-year-olds. I mean, I don't think most 20-year-olds are
Yeah,
capable of voting. No, I include myself in this. I'm not saying I'm better than anybody, but crikey, moving it down to 16 just seems ridiculous.
yeah. It's a tough one. Who do we put our faith in, the masses or the elites? If you go out to, I don't know, Kettering town centre on a Friday night, you don't want to give them the vote. But equally, it's the elites. Yeah, look what they have, the WEF lot. I don't really fancy them either. So I don't have a good answer, I'm
Oh, the
afraid.
much hated Klaus Schwab is leaving though. I don't know if you saw that. I'll
Oh
be honest.
nine.
I've never read into any of this WEF stuff. Other than when I saw that he was leaving, and I took a quick glance. I'm quite glad, I think, because I know that it can become a bit of a cesspit and a few rabbit holes. But
Mhm.
yes, it's you do make a good point. Neither side of the coin is a particularly attractive one to pin your hope into.
No, and I think perhaps that's the difference. That's why the country's gone the way it has. Before, if you think back 100, 150 years ago, you had an elite which was largely aligned to the national interest, but now we have an elite which takes no interest in the national interest because they advocate for a supranational interest. I said
Yeah.
interest too many times there.
Well, if we're playing some sort of shot bingo, I've noticed that you said ossification a few times as well.
Yeah, my vocabulary is ossified. Sorry.
And ruining a nation. I wrote that down at one point. I noticed that made me laugh. I think we'll
That's
leave it
Adam,
there.
that's an Adam Smith quote. There's much ruin in a nation.
Fair enough. Well, on that then, not because we're quickly running out of time, but because we've just made a really profound point. I think
Yes.
we'll call an end to this.
I'm stroking my beard. I don't have one, but if I
No,
did, I would.
no, or hair. Um,
Well,
well,
that's just personal now.
yeah, I'm sorry about that. Thanks for listening. Hopefully, we'll probably do these more regularly as the election goes on. I don't know why, because as you've just heard, we're thoroughly miserable about it and aren't gunning for any team anyway, but that's not going to stop us. And hopefully, it doesn't stop you listening either. So, cheers for tuning in.